Welcome to another episode of People with Passion for Pets. Today we are talking to Cody Will with Rattlesnake Ready. Cody uses his knowledge and passion for reptiles and his love for dogs to provide a much-needed service for dog owners here in the Sonoran Desert near Phoenix, Arizona. All right. Hi, Cody. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
So we're excited to have you on today. This is definitely something that I think anybody that lives in any type of desert environment should know about and research a little bit. So you do rattlesnake and toad avoidance training for dogs.
That's correct.
That's really cool. How long have you been doing that?
Almost 9 years now. The rattlesnake training is what we originally started and specialized in for years. Just within the past couple of years, we started up the toad training just surely out of demand and people asking for it. So toad training a couple of years, snake training for going on 9 now.
So avoidance training means that a dog is actually trained to know that scent or to recognize that danger and then not go near it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so basically what we do with both our snake and toad avoidance training, and we're teaching dogs to be safe in the desert by leaving these animals alone. So pretty much all dogs have some level of prey drive, whether it's just a little curiosity or lots of prey drive toward any movement. And so again, we want to teach them. If you see one of these toads or a rattlesnake too, leave them alone. Don't go investigate because that's going to end badly and again could be potentially fatal. And so the actual training, which I'm assuming we'll talk more about here soon, there's multiple steps to it, but we basically teach the dog to not go after a toad. Don't you see one hopping away, don't go chase after it. Just simply leave it alone, and ultimately that's what ends up keeping them safe.
Yeah, it's really a good service. I mean, really, especially in Arizona, as you know, you're probably quite busy.
Oh yeah.
Even just out hiking, we see them all the time. We scoot them off the trail. Get off the trail.
Yep. So I'm a little biased because it's my business, but yeah, definitely, it's a big need for it here. Lots of rattlesnakes, lots of dog owners who like to be active with their dogs. So, yep.
Yeah.
One of the, and you have a great website. In fact, I wanted to share kind of the screen and kind of show you a website a little bit, but there's so much great information on your website going step by step through how the training works. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit. But also I thought that section on the toxicology was so informative, really, really neat. But yeah, these pictures are almost kind of cute looking, but we've had a dog from a friend at a camping trip that got bit by a rattlesnake, and it's scary. We were out there with our horses. We were in the middle of nowhere. We actually had to drape the dog over the horse and
over my horse, and
over
he just
Jim's
took it
horse.
just fine.
But so you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And you're definitely right. It's really scary, really traumatic event for the dog, and also possibly life-threatening. Yeah. So the photos, which you look at them and they look a little photoshopped or a little wonky, but that's really what happens. So typically, when a dog is bitten by a rattlesnake, the bite itself is painful as far as we know for a dog. Like bumping into something sharp or pointy. They have big fangs that inject the venom. So the bite itself in the exact moment it happens is a little painful. Then you got the venom that gets in there, and anywhere from just a few minutes to 20-30 minutes later, they start swelling dramatically. And so those photos on that part of the website kind of show that. And those are all photos from people who have sent them to me, meaning it's like people I know whose dog was trained after that happened. And so these aren't ones that were just pulled from, Google or something, which you can see many more on Google Images if you search it. But those are real dogs that we've worked with since that event. And it's not a fun experience for anybody, obviously, especially for the dog. But it's expensive vet bill, and a lot of chaos when a dog gets bit by a rattlesnake.
So I noticed one thing that you did on your FAQs, which is really good knowledge, is that the thought is out there that little snakes, baby snakes, are more dangerous than the big snakes. And you had a good explanation of that. Do you mind going over that again?
Yeah, so that's a really, I don't know exactly where that started, but there is a very, very common myth that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than an adult rattlesnake. And unfortunately, it's even kind of infiltrated some like medical practices, and doctors might even treat bites differently from a baby snake versus a big snake based off of that rumor. But the reality is, and there's some studies that if you do research, you'll see that it's been disproven or discredited. And yeah, so what bottom line, what it boils down to, yes, baby rattlesnakes and adult rattlesnakes have very potent venom. It's still an emergency no matter which one you get bit by. But larger snakes simply have much larger venom glands. So if you were to, not that anybody should do this, but if you were to milk a baby rattlesnake versus an adult rattlesnake, the volume of venom that would come from a baby rattlesnake is, I mean, we're talking like a drop basically, versus a larger mature rattlesnake, much larger venom glands, and you might get, a significant amount more of venom. And so that said, if a larger snake was to dump all of its venom in one bite instance, it would do a lot more damage than a baby rattlesnake's bite. And I will say baby rattlesnakes can be a little snappier. They're new to the world. They're not as conservative as the big ones because, everything is out to get a baby rattlesnake, whereas the big guys might be kind of left to run a little bit. A road runner can easily eat a baby rattlesnake, not necessarily a 4-foot
And they're born without the rattle, right? So they might not be able to warn.
Yeah, so the warning device doesn't work as well. So when they're first born, they have what's called a pre-button, which is just like this little nub. It doesn't make any sound or anything. And then as they grow and shed, then they get added segments, and then it can eventually start making noise. Usually about the third shed is when it starts making a little buzzing sound, and then it gets louder from there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I loved about your website, you talked about, because you obviously have to use real snakes during your rattlesnake avoidance training, and you call them your employees. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah,
can't do it without it, right?
Avoid the word pet for sure, just because it kind of insinuates a little fluffy critter you play fetch with and take on walks. And while we have huge respect for them and take good care of them, I don't use the word pet.
Mm-hmm. But definitely employees, obviously they're a huge integral part of what you do. So you use real snakes, and they're not defanged and they're not milked or anything. So there's no, I mean, they're still poisonous, but you do something so that the dog can't get hurt, I'm assuming. I'm hoping.
Yeah. So that's my biggest question is how we're rendering them safe and whatnot. So yeah, they're muzzled so they can't bite. So we use a medical tape that's safe for skin, that doesn't hurt them, that is, applied in a way that is humane. They can still see and breathe. They just can't get their mouth open to bite the dogs. And so we feel that's the best route to go for everything. So including the snakes, including the dogs and the people involved. Yeah, so we don't milk them. They're totally intact. We haven't, surgically altered the snake whereby, ripping fangs out or having venom glands taken out. So they're just a normal rattlesnake who can't get their mouth open during training. They only wear the muzzle, during the training. And that's it, not before, or after.
Okay, so I have to ask, who gets the privilege of putting on the muzzle?
Yeah.
Honey.
Yeah, that's I joke. I can't get my wife to do it. So yeah, that's me that does that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And the short answer as to how I do it is very, very carefully.
Yeah, I bet.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you have quite a bit of snakes, and you use different types of snakes. Is there a reason for that? Do different snakes have different scents, or?
Yeah. And so unfortunately, because pretty much all reptiles, in the wild, they have to find the right species to mate with and things like that. And so they do have, as far as I know, different smells, and that is why we feel it is absolutely crucial to use real rattlesnakes for the training. And what, unfortunately for me though, what that means is I have to use real rattlesnakes. If they all smelled the same, I could use a non-venomous like gopher snake. It'd be a lot easier and safer for me. But because we got to get the dog to learn that rattlesnake smell is bad, that rattling is bad, and all those things, we got to use the real thing. And I think we don't just use real rattlesnakes, but we try to stick to the right kind that's found where we're training. And so when we go up to like, mountain areas like Prescott or Payson, which we do a few times a year, there's Arizona black rattlesnakes, blacktail rattlesnakes, and, Mojave rattlesnakes that are found in some of those areas. Whereas down in Phoenix area, it's mostly maybe Mojaves, mostly Diamondbacks. And so those are the varieties we're using down here and up there. Now, kind of what we've noticed is the different kind of rattlesnake we use, I don't think is absolutely crucial. They all pretty much sound the same. And I think there is overlap in the scent. But the line between what's too different is the non-venomous snakes that have a different biology and lifestyle, just the way they take down prey and stuff. So gopher snakes, king snakes, and snakes like that, we don't use and feel that we shouldn't, because it wouldn't necessarily get the message across the way that it needs to be.
So can you talk a little bit about the training? I know it's very well explained on your website, but just for our viewers, can you kind of go over it a little bit for us?
Yeah, no, happy to. Yeah, and we do every appointment. I'm pretty much everybody who has hired me to come out. You're having some guy with some rattlesnakes come out to your house. So most people have done research before I get there, but I still just explain everything right up front again, right before we start, just so it's fresh on their mind and they can ask questions. And but yeah, so 4-step process. It's extremely common sense lesson, luckily. Kind of survival based. So dogs catch on really quick. It's one of the few dog trainings that you can actually do it in one lesson and they get it down really well and they retain it pretty much for life. And then I'll explain more about what we recommend doing after initial training. But yeah, it works very effectively. So step one, we use small rattlesnakes. So the dogs during our training get to see a couple different sizes of rattlesnake. That's just so they kind of have vocabulary and are aware they do come in different sizes. So we start right off the bat with a little guy, and again, it's muzzled so it can't bite. We typically place it somewhere, relatively easy to see, so the dog gets a nice, clear first look at it. And also that way, when they approach it and we correct them using an e-collar, and I'll explain that more in a second too, because the snake is right there and there's nothing else around it and it's very visible, they make the right association right away. So the dog is wearing e-collar, shock collar, whatever you want to call it. And so, and they're, nowadays they make great ones that have like other features too, like vibrate and tone and things like that. We pretty much exclusively use the shock feature unless it's an extremely sensitive dog, or, there might be a reason we try a vibrate or something. But the reason we don't just do that for every dog though, is that most of the time it doesn't work. They need a little stimulus to kind of spook them and make them not like the snake. But they're adjustable. So we start low, and as soon as the dog approaches the snake, which we let them, as soon as they're within a couple feet, maybe even a few inches, depending on how they're approaching it, we give them a perfectly timed correction, and they basically blame the snake and back away almost immediately. So right. The nice thing is we kind of fool them into thinking the snake is where the little zap came from, and they want almost nothing to do with it right away. And so that's step one. After they're avoiding that snake and don't like it, then we move on to 2 supplementary steps to kind of build on that. And so I'll put a shed skin out somewhere on the person's property, or if it's where we're training, somewhere in like a bush or a hole or something. And we basically orient the dog downwind of the shed rattlesnake skin. And a couple things can happen there. If they got a good whiff of the real snake in that very first step, they often already know to avoid the skin, meaning they catch wind of it and they think, no, that's that same smell that just zapped me. So I'm not going to do that. Yeah, exactly. So there's some dogs that don't even need a correction on that step. They already know. But also that's why we do it too, is it also fills in the gaps if they didn't get a good whiff of the real snake. Say they approached it really fast, they're running at it. That's where I have to stop them a little further back so they can't hurt the snake.
Hurt the snake either, right?
Yeah. So that's where, if they didn't, for whatever reason, get a good whiff of it, they do approach the skin, sniff that, and as soon as they're right on that at the source, another carefully timed correction, which they then blame on that odor and back off, and in the skin itself too, I guess. But and that's kind of what that accomplishes, is gives them another opportunity to learn rattlesnake smell is bad. And you get some dogs that sniff the real snake and they sniff the skin. They're just high prey drive, whatever, and it's like double data now. It's more evidence that smell is bad, and there's a consistent negative feeling that comes with it if you're looking for it. Yeah, and then so after that we move on to sound. So I want to make sure the dogs understand to run from rattling, and so we have a great little speaker with a fantastic quality rattlesnake recording that we actually took ourselves, and we essentially hide this speaker, in a bush or behind a rock pile, or something that's a pretty natural spot for a rattlesnake to hang out. And essentially we pass that spot with the dog. I play the loud rattlesnake recording, usually have the owner run away too, just to add to the drama of it. And we teach the dog to run away from that sound. And so they get a little correction right when that sound occurs as well. And that's what creates a link between hearing that noise and then again, feeling something not fun. They've also probably heard some rattling from the first snake, so they already have a little bit of an idea, and this just kind of hits it home even farther. By that point, they're pretty much trained. The very last thing we then do is bring out an adult rattlesnake. And that's, again, just so they got to see a couple different sizes during the training. This gives them a chance to see now a larger snake, and kind of gives them a chance to put everything back together again too, because we had the real snake out, then we did just smell, just sound. Now it's kind of everything again in one step. The big snakes we use typically rattle pretty good. They get to hear it, they get to see a larger one, and then of course they're able to smell it too. Usually by that point, they want absolutely nothing to do with it.
We're done. We're going home.
Exactly.
That's the beauty, they do learn fast.
They do, yeah. Especially things like this. And we get a lot of questions like, how do they learn it so quick? And I think the best analogy I've come up with is it's a lot like a little kid touching a hot stove or something. You usually only do that one time, never again. That same little kid might take weeks to teach manners. And that's the same thing for normal dog training with, certain, you got to do a lot of repeated exercises and get them to catch on what you want and things like that. This is kind of a common sense, like, hey, snake bad, and they get it and they carry it with them a long time.
So one thing I noticed when I was looking at how you do it is it really is a good way that you do it, because when we train our dogs and our clients, we teach them about the sight, the smell, and the sounds. And you actually cover every one of those things, because dogs survive off of those senses. And when you hit every sense, not just one, not just a visual, but you covered the scent, the sound, and the visual, you've got the bases covered. So it's really a good way that you do it. And it's very professional. I mean, it's really good.
Thank you. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I think it not only does it hit on all senses, where we're trying to equip the dog for all different scenarios, because, the reality is you don't know where the snake's going to be. It's going to be either crossing the path right in front of you. It might be coiled in a bush, a few feet off the path. It might show up right on your back porch, but be hidden completely behind patio furniture. There's a lot of, we can't possibly prepare them for every scenario, but we can equip them to know that rattling is bad, the smell of a rattlesnake is bad, and of course the real thing. And so, we want them to leave our training as equipped as possible.
That's very good. How did you originally start it? I mean, what made you go into rattlesnake avoidance training?
You were walking on the trail and there was.
Yeah, it's not, that's another common question I get too, for sure. I didn't think I'd be doing this for a living, to be completely honest. So what happened, I think I alluded to this earlier, but I grew up in Northern California in a rural area, part of the state that has a lot of rattlesnakes. And so I worked at a pet store all through high school. And it's still there. It's called the Aquarium and Pets. It's in Red Bluff, California. And a customer came in asking about snake avoidance training, and I had never heard of it. So I said, that sounds fascinating. I've never heard of it. I'll look into it for you and see if I can find anybody that does it. And did some research, saw that there was, virtually nobody in the area offering it, at least not regularly. And so I kind of am an entrepreneur, and so I just jumped into like, all right, I can do this. And so and there's more background to it than that I won't get into, but I've got multiple exotic vets in the family. I love reptiles, I love dogs, pretty much all animals. So it wasn't like I just suddenly decided to pick up a snake and start training dogs. There was more to the backstory, but ultimately that's what started it, was this customer that came in and just asking that question got the wheels turning in my head, and that's kind of where it all started. And went to school in California, and as soon as I graduated, moved here and moved the business with me, and have been doing it ever since.
I think your Sonoran Desert Toad training is very interesting, and I see that's kind of a recent one. But You know, I always try every monsoon season. I have a blog post that I put out to just inform people about it, because especially with so many people that move here from other states, and they totally don't understand. You know, they may know about snakes, but they have no idea about the toads. You know,
You don't think of amphibians in the Sonoran Desert very much. So.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's definitely a problem, and that's why we actually started it. Is we had so many people asking for that sort of thing because there was virtually nobody that offered it in the area, at least not consistently and regularly. And so we've only done snake training, and just about 2 years ago we started that up to help meet that need as well.
and so we're talking about the Sonoran Desert Toad, which a lot of people may not know about. It. Can you elaborate that a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll be honest, when my wife and I first moved to Arizona, we didn't realize there were toads here either. But no, so they're a big, kind of almost like bullfrog. They're huge. They're really big. They're kind of a green color with a white belly. They're fairly abundant in Sonoran Desert. The reason you don't see them all the time, though, is they're pretty water dependent, as most of the amphibians in Arizona are. And so the most common time of year that people encounter them is usually during monsoon season, and it's also usually at night. So they're not necessarily something that like hikers will run into left and right, kind of like rattlesnakes, but rather homeowners who live in an area that have a lot of these toads. You know, they might step out on their porch one evening after a good monsoon rain, and there's one right there under their porch light grabbing bugs. And so they're commonly encountered at certain times of year. And unfortunately for dogs, they're extremely toxic. And so if a dog goes up to grab it, you know, play with it, or basically if they get it in their mouth at all, it can be harmful, if not even fatal, if something isn't done quickly about it. And so they're a big toxic toad that shows up after rains typically.
We'll share your screen again, but so your website is rattlesnakeready.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you're training all through the Phoenix area. So are you going to people for your training?
In-home lessons, basically. So we go right to people's backyards. Now there might be people who don't want to do that, and so we meet at, you know, a park or somewhere where there's some desert space that we can use. Some vet offices have either property or neighboring property they use, and so we kind of do a variety of things, but mostly what we do is go right to people's backyards. That's where a lot of people want the training because they live in an area that gets rattlesnakes. And so that's what we currently do. We also very soon will have our own on-site option available as well. And so people who, again, for whatever reason, don't want it in their own yard, or say they don't even necessarily have a yard, they just are worried about where their dog hikes and camps and things like that. You know, they just want the training done in general. And so that's, again, what we'll have an on-site option available for. So we have both coming, and currently do, again, just in people's yards.
I'll tell you, the area that you're going into is a nice tourist spot anyway. So if they're coming to Arizona, they're going to stay up there. They're going to drive up there. It's really, really a pretty location. Oh, that'd be really cool when you get that going.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're just in the Cape Creek area, just north of Phoenix, I guess. And
yeah,
partly is because there's a lot of rattlesnakes up in that area too. We get a lot of business just right in the, you know, if you picture the map of Metro Phoenix area, all the like outer areas, especially places built right up against the foot of, you know, mountains and stuff, they get a lot of snakes. And so that's where a lot of our time is spent. But yeah, and we do other parts of Arizona too. Some areas off the 10 getting close to California, and we do Prescott and Payson, as I think I mentioned earlier. We go to those places as well a few times a year, but most of our time spent in the greater Phoenix area.
Now, I know snakes do hibernate in the wintertime, but that doesn't mean you don't want to like do training now, right? In fact, I'm assuming just with this beautiful weather, it's probably easier to train your dog now than it would be in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do train year round. We have to obviously adapt to the, you know, the climate, the conditions of, you know, with the weather, just because you know, it's really hot in the summer and it can be cold in the winter sometimes too. And so our hours aren't the same throughout the year. But yeah, and you kind of nailed it when you said that about winter. Right now is actually perfect dog training weather. Because the dogs, you know, aren't going to overheat on a 60-degree day, whereas you bring them out on even a 90-degree day, let alone 100 or 110, that's just not safe for them to be out, and under mental stress and stuff.
Right.
And so in summer, we only train super early in the morning. We're usually starting around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we're usually done by about 10 o'clock or so. I mean, as soon as it starts breaching 90 and into 100, it's just not safe, in our opinion. And not just because of the heat itself, but our lesson isn't the most fun lesson. And so dogs are under a little bit of stress. We're spooking them. And so when you combine increased heart rate from running from a rattling sound with the heat, it's just not safe. So yeah, we're limited in the summer. Spring and fall, usually if things are pretty mild, we can go all day long. And then winter, we can train pretty much all day long as well. Winter, things kind of switch from the safety of the dogs to more like the snakes. Like if it's wet and cold, well, a lot of dogs don't love that either, but the snakes can get sick in weather like that and stuff if we're taking them from heat to cold and wet back and forth. So that's not okay. But yeah, if it's 60s during the day, that's actually perfect weather. It's really easy for us to have portable heat for our snakes, so we keep a few snakes warm year round. And so yeah, so they're active in the middle of January for us, just as if it was an August morning or something. And so I think a lot of people, as soon as snakes aren't on the news or they don't really see as many of them on the trails, it starts kind of going off their radar. And one thing I want to mention too, and I think this is on the website as well, the thing about Arizona is we have such mild winters here. That's why people love being here in the winter. That's kind of why snakes do so well here too, is they don't, in places like Montana or New York, outside of the city, obviously, but places where like timber rattlesnakes and prairie rattlesnakes live, they have to hibernate. Sometimes as early as September, things are getting really cold and they're going deep into a crevice or abandoned prairie dog town or something, and they're basically done for the winter. Here, though, you can see occasional rattlesnake in the middle of December, middle of January. Vets here have treated bites every month of the year.
Yeah.
It does happen because down here, it doesn't get cold enough for them to have to be extreme about how they hibernate. It's actually might have a 70-degree stretch in the middle of December, and you might see one sitting outside of its den site. You might see several sitting out of its den site, actually. So it can happen. So the risk, I want to just say, isn't gone. It's lower because they're definitely not near as active, but the risk is still there, and the weather's perfect for dog training. So yeah, I wish people would do it when it's cooler and not when it's 100, because it's a lot nicer too for everybody.
Absolutely.
It seems that when we were out riding horses in the wintertime, we would see them actually on the trail because the trail was packed down and it held the heat real well. So they would stretch out across the trail as you're riding the trail, and you hope your horse sees them. And most of the time they would go, "What is that?" But they would be right across the trail as you're walking.
Yeah. And then we had a call on Christmas Day once for a lady who was panicking because she found a rattlesnake in her backyard. Thanksgiving tends to be a time people run into them too. I think it's because people are clearing off their patios, getting ready for an outdoor dinner on Thanksgiving.
And, surprise!
And that's something I saw too on your website. You don't just do the avoidance training; you also can like rattlesnake proof a yard and could do some other services.
Yeah, sort of. So we actually, I do have a license to remove and relocate nuisance reptiles, so including rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, any stuff like that. So occasionally, and the reason I actually have that is there's been times where during a snake avoidance appointment for a dog, I've actually found a rattlesnake in that person's backyard while training the dog.
Wow.
There's been a couple times where I'm hiding that speaker in a bush for the sound step, and sure enough, there's a wild one right in there.
Oh, wow.
Pause, and I have to catch it, and I have an extra bucket in the car I keep for that reason. So that's actually why I have the license. Now, we actually don't necessarily do like the 24/7 snake removal and snake fencing. It's actually a company called Rattlesnake Solutions. They're pretty big in the Phoenix area, and that's what they do. So they do 24/7 snake removal and snake-proof backyards by installing snake fencing. Basically, they do a fantastic job, and they recommend us for training, and we send people their way for all the other rattlesnake services that we don't offer. And so, yeah, it's
interesting.
They're on the website, but it's not. We're not the same company. We're two different.
Cool.
At what point would you recommend somebody would get their dog trained? Is there a certain age that is a good age to start with a dog?
Fortunately, there's not a whole lot of criteria. They don't have to have any prior training or anything. The only thing we do require is they be at least 6 months or older. And that's not necessarily like an arbitrary like number we chose. A lot of it has to do with puppy development and going through fear stages and stuff like that. We don't want to spook them at too young of an age, just because that opens up the possibility of, you know, helping them interpret the world not in the right way, or, you know, it can have effects beyond just avoiding rattlesnakes.
Mhm.
And so that said, 6 months is about the cutoff. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we can work with older dogs. We usually kind of leave that up to the dog owner based off of what they feel their risk is. If it's an older dog that doesn't see, smell, or hear very well, it mostly goes right outside the potty and comes right back in. That's probably one that it wouldn't be worth scaring it with a rattlesnake. Honestly, I think the risk is actually pretty low, because they're probably just going to miss the rattlesnake entirely, unless it, you know, freak accident where they did happen to step right where it was or something. It can still happen. So again, we're happy to work with them, but usually those are ones that we just, you know, it's probably not necessary. Now, if they're on the older side, but they still are sniffing bushes and their nose and eyes and ears still work great, then they can absolutely benefit from the training. And we also get some that are, you know, totally deaf or totally blind, and whether they're older or young, we can still work with those too, because again, our training hits on all senses. So maybe they don't learn the rattling sound because they're deaf, but they can still pick up the odor of a rattlesnake and know to avoid that. And then they can still see one, obviously. And so that's where we can adjust the program to the dog and their handicaps or issues. So yeah, any dog, any breed, any age beyond 6 months is a candidate.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you do seminars where maybe a group of people gets you out and they get, because I know you said you come to people's homes, but do you also have a way where they sometimes have, and I know right now events aren't that big of a deal because of all the social distancing, but you know, where maybe somebody says, hey, well, we're going to have this weekend dog event and we're going to have this, you know, workshop, and if you want to sign up, you can get your dog rattlesnake proof or something.
Yeah, so we do. The only thing about the training is we do this because we feel this is what's best for the dog. We train dogs one at a time, one-on-one, unless the owner has like 2 or 3 dogs and they're always together anyway. We can train those dogs together, but dogs tend to distract each other. And so that's where, you know, if somebody shows up with their dog for training, it's just me, them, and their dog, and that's it during the training. So what we do for the group thing is, you know, I try to, you know, I say that, but I always preface it with, it's not actually a group training. We don't have a bunch of dogs waiting around together during our classes. What we do is we spread them out. So I will go to like a vet office or like an HOA or something for a neighborhood might host one, or like there's various places that will do it. Vet offices are probably one of the big one. And then some private property owners who just tell all their neighbors, hey, we're going to host one at our ranch or whatever, and we'll do it there. But we spread things out. So it's one dog at a time, one after another, all day long in that same location. And that's what we'll be doing here as well too. So it's, you know, it's going to be, it's still a private lesson basically, no matter where you do it, whether it's at our place, in your own backyard. It's just me, you, and your dog. You know, there might be a dog coming in as we're finishing up with one, but not into the training area. It's just pulling into the property sort of thing. And we take that pretty seriously, just so the dogs get the most out of it. It's not like this rush, chaotic with dogs everywhere sort of thing. It's very focused on each dog that's going through it.
Okay.
So for people to contact you, they would, I'm assuming, go here to your website, call you or book an appointment with you, or you got your number on here? Yeah,
so that's the website rattlesnakeready.com has, I mean, we've put pretty much everything on there, and so you can learn all about the step-by-step, the training, the way it works. There's a lot of other good info on there. And then yes, email, phone, call, you can text that number as well, whatever works best for you. My wife, Kate, she does all the scheduling and stuff. And so that's typically the person that you'll get a hold of. You're welcome to ask for me, but Kate typically handles everything behind the phone so that I can spend all my time training dogs.
And I noticed what I would recommend though is even if you're not in the Phoenix area, go to the website, because the information on the website is really good. It's good information to learn about the rattlesnakes, even if you don't have rattlesnakes, or, you know, if you're not sure, you can't get to your place, but it's a good informative website. It's well done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and actually one thing we forget too, most of the United States has some kind of rattlesnake that lives
Mhm.
with the exception of maybe a few, northern, like Midwestern type states, but I mean, for the most part, there's some kind of rattlesnake found all over the country. But yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm an avid hiker, so yeah, I can definitely tell you all the rattlesnake encounters I've had with my dog. So it's good
Yeah.
training. I think it's a must-have if you're going to live here and
Yeah.
you're going to be an outdoor person, or you're going to live in one of the. I mean, there's so many people here. We live near the South Mountain area, and people that have yards that go against the mountain. Obviously, it's not just for them when they go out and hike. It's like a daily activity in the
Right.
backyard. So I think that's a must-have. So glad to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Cody. Nice meeting you. Glad you do what you do.
Nice meeting you guys too. Thanks for reaching out to us. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the information. And until next time, keep your paws on the road.